So let me get started. This is the conversation. GTM is the buzzword. How do you get to market? And how does that impact your business design and strategy? I think, and you alluded to it, that it's quite linked. It's almost, think of it as a spine or a backbone to what you're trying to build. We're going to try and cover strategic themes, tactical themes, and very importantly, it is an execution machine, right? So GTM is not theoretical. There are strategic points of view that you will take that I urge you to take, and then think about everything from the word organization, right? Because you're not a large company and don't have the luxury of time. You're an unknown person trying to build something and create a brand. So focus is going to be important. Summarized from various sessions that I and the material that I read, I thought these were the key takeaways from a GTM design perspective. To be consistent when you're creating your brand, start where you want to end. And Raji, I have got Raji and all the three founders are here. I have your value statement, so I'm going to use that apart from the Starbucks one. So look forward to your help on that. We'll talk a little bit about leads to answer your question on segmentation and focus, right? So let's just jump in. This is broadly a framework that you will find in a lot of material online or experts that you speak to. I've tried to summarize this for the benefit of our conversation. On the left, my left is really the inbound marketing, the consumer journey that you walk through. That is the typical funnel that you see. How do you get people into the funnel? What is inbound marketing? And then the different stages that the consumer goes through, right? Right from discovering who you are, what is your EdTech product, how does he or she get hooked onto it? How do you convert? And how do you get them to become advocates of your brand? So that's typically the mind of the consumer. And on the left side is you trying to walk through each of these steps as you narrow down the funnel. And here are the decisions you as a founder need to think about when you think of GTM, right? There is a strategic call on brand. How do you position it? We'll talk about segmentation. Then there are some tactical stuff that you need to do. And I've taken the analogy of driving a car, which is used very often in the GTM segment, as to how do you think about accelerating? How do you apply the brakes? When is the consumer going to use the clutch? And what are the levers that are in your control? And the scary part, what is not in your control, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then everything has to be measured, right? So if you notice, I've been very, very, lucky to have leaders who really set high expectations. But just as you get into any meetings, I find that everyone comes with their own agenda, but forgets to ask what the audience wants, right? So if you start off any conversation, whether it's with your customers, whether it's with your teams, or whether it's an occasion like this, get the expectations up front. Because we all have 3 seconds to give everybody, right? I just had a session with the students and I asked them, whether you're a 14-year-old or a 44-year-old, you just have a very limited span. So if I don't hook you on in the first 3 or 4 minutes or first 3 or 4 seconds, I've lost you, right? So asking what you want is a great way to start a conversation, all right? Okay, so let's jump right into the first part, which is a brand. And these are my 2 favorite brands. I take a lot of inspiration from them. I was fortunate to work with one of them. So we'll talk to you a little bit about what is brand, what's the essence, how do you develop and think about an identity, whether it's the name, the touch point, or the product or service. Has anybody heard of a company called Lululemon? Yeah? Canadian company. $6 billion sales, $40 billion valuation. Do you know what Lululemon does? Imagine a Canadian company in 1998 started, and Nike was already established. Like you, millions of customers loved it, and they thought of creating a brand called Lululemon. It's active sportswear. It applies the principles of yoga to design products and really do well, right? So if you're Nike or if you're a young guy sitting out of Canada, you never want to compete with Nike. But Lululemon is a very, very precious company today, does very well on the stock market. But our task is even more daunting, right? Nobody knows us. So how do you think about creating a brand when you're thinking of edutech or any large B2C consumer segment, whether it's food, whether it's coffee, whether it's hotels? How do you create your brand? You're not lucky to have these beautiful logos. You don't have people like Raman who know what's going on Twitter and what you put out, right? So to think about your brand, the name, the essence, think of it, this is just a framework to think about. But what I want to leave you with is that as a startup founder, you have to write your own story. And your story starts with you. because there's basically nobody around you in the organization. You're trying to inspire people and you're trying to find consumers who are going to fall in love with your brand. So starting out, you're the brand. And everything that you do is going to become part of the consumer brand that you're trying to build. The culture that we'll talk about a little bit, the people you hire, and how you execute, right? So when Starbucks started, nobody knew of Howard Schultz, nobody knew of Starbucks. Today, anyone who visits the West Coast goes to a very small coffee shop called Pike Place, which is in a fish market, or rather a traditional market. You don't have a single seat, but people go there and there's usually a queue outside, whether it's raining or snowing in Seattle. People just want to go and touch the place. Now, how did he create that magic, right? Or how did Steve Jobs, one of the greatest marketeers of our time, create that? It's because they imprinted the company with values that they stood for, right? So Howard Schultz, by the way, lived in what we call as government housing, which is not necessarily as privileged as you and me are, right? He didn't even have a proper house to live in. His father lost mobility when he was just 7 years of age. So he was a person who got scarred in his early life at the age of 7, didn't have money, didn't really have the future, is a billionaire today, and people literally want to touch him because he's created a fantastic, a great brand. But he started small. What he imprinted the company with were his own values. He stood for a new America, an America where people could achieve the dream, and he wanted to create a company where people were respected. So if you walk into a Starbucks, the magic of the place, right? It's called the third place, the people who serve you. But if you think about the brand, why do you love it so much? Because you feel very comfortable there. You feel respected, right? When you go there, people ask you your name. They write it on the cup. So everything that this brand does is about respect and love for humanity. So you need to figure out, just a small note is, what do you stand for? What is the value that you want to put into the company? And the million-dollar question is, but I'm building an EdTech company. I don't have a sexy coffee shop. But your EdTech company is going to stand for something. So start thinking of your brand as what you want it to be, 10 years out or 15 years out. So think big at the stage when you're deciding what your brand is going to be about, right? Whether it's the name, whether it's the identity, and it has to play out in every touch point. And you can decide which value resonates the most with you. Whether it's a middle-class, simple value of respecting people, whether it's, making a dream come true, whether it's allowing people to take a difficult course and change their course of life. What is it? Please focus on values. It's very old-fashioned. I know a lot of people don't want to talk about values, ethics, or other stuff, but believe me, if you study great brands, they have the brands that you really love, right? Why do I use the word love? Because it's an extreme word. You will remember what that brand stands for because it's got the DNA of the founder in it. Yeah? Let's have you speak, Rashmi. What is your favorite brand?
I like Apple. Yeah, so
Why?
It's about the product, right? And it's also about how Steve Jobs has inspired people around him how to look at things differently. So more about not as a brand, but more about the person himself, right? And he has managed to create it throughout his lifetime. The same innovation, the same design in the product, right? To look at it differently. Right. That's something I like about it.
Great. So as you heard her, you did talk, when she described the brand that she loves, she talked about inspiration, innovation, scale, impact. I would have used the word sexy design because everybody, loves to carry an Apple product. Because from the word go, they said that the design of the product is going to be so outstanding. And if you remember the early commercials with which they launched, it was for foolish people who thought they could change the world, right? So the brand is positioned on the plank that you have to be foolish enough to think you can change the world, and then you will be a maverick. So just the minute you walk into an Apple store, or even if you're at a local store in Gurgaon, you touch the product, you feel like you're part of this innovation and this design. So it's very, very, very conscious, and it's very authentically done because every touch point then, reveals this value of the brand. So when you're thinking about crafting your brand, I think the first thing is, what are you doing to change the world? It's not just about common words like customer problems. Believe me, people don't have problems. They're very emotional. and every problem has an emotional side to it. So what are you doing so differently? What are you thinking about writing or the story that's going to impact consumers, right? That's your vision. And then what is your commitment that you want? I heard a conversation about students, and as she was talking about it, they're very disciplined, they don't drop. Just think of the amount of commitment you expect from your employees or the co-founders that join you. Your customers expect the same of you. So it's very important to actually write down, what are you promising me? What are you going to give me? Is it innovation? Is it a yoga activewear, Lululemon? Is it a fantastic third place? Therefore, I will touch and fall in love with you, and I will hold your brand nearest to my heart. So what is the promise that you're making at a most fundamental level? Don't put any funda or gyan in it. If you can explain your brand promise to a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, or a 50-year-old, in whichever language you choose to write, please articulate that in that fashion. So if you walk into a Starbucks store, I urge you next time to see, there will be a plaque that if I don't get your beverage right, I will remake it. Has anybody seen that ever? Or have you tried it? If you don't like your beverage, no questions asked, it'll be changed. Try asking an airline company, and I won't name the Indian brands because I love all of them. Try asking them to change anything in the airline. They will say, I'll have to call somebody, go to a jewelry store, go to Tanish. I have to call the store manager to take permission. Go to a Starbucks in India, in any part of the world, tell them you want to make your beverage again because it's not made right. That person at the store, whoever he or she is, whether he's a barista, a store manager, or if I'm training at the store as a CEO, I will just change your beverage, no questions asked. The company has a process of training me, of empowering me to take that decision. I know the cost of the beverage. I just have to take your glass back and make it again. No questions asked. It's not to say God, the customer is God. It's just the aspect or the attribute of the brand and the commitment that I have made that I will get your beverage right. So you think about every touch point. Think about people's training to your aspect, right? We were talking about this. In the training module, it is ingrained in you that don't question the customer. If the beverage is wrong, just remake it. Because human beings are making the beverage. It's not a robotic machine that's making it. You could have got it wrong, right? And what it does is, a lot of people, when we started the company in India, they said, oh my God, everybody is going to ask for free beverages. Usko pasand nahi aayega to change karega. Believe you me, hardly a fraction of people come back and ask you to make the beverage. Hardly a fraction. But what is the larger thing is that the commitment made is, you will get my beverage right. You have to fulfill it. And there are no compromises on it, right? The other thing that you have to think about is the attributes of the brand, right? Why are you so distinctly valuable to your customers that other people value your brand above everybody? And just try and put it into a matrix and try and think of your brand attributes as also defensible business moats, right? Most of you, when you go to your investors, they'll ask you, so what is defensible about your product? Why can't, the next day Uday start what Jatin is doing? What is defensible around me? And I'm going to make a controversial statement. Humbly, there are very, very smart people around the globe, in India or anywhere else. People will get the tech right. What people may not get right is the emotional relationship that you will build with the consumer. And if you're able to create that with fantastic tech, then you have a winner of a brand, right? Because he can get the tech right, and there is plagiarism, right? Everything that you put out there is going to get copied very easily. So think of your attributes in terms of something which is special, something which is different, but not so different, because you have to admit somebody will get the tech right. But how will you craft it and deliver it? Your scope of delivery, how you go to market and represent yourself and build that relationship has to be very distinct, right? So seed your brand with some of these attributes and think about it. I'm going to pause if the messaging is coming out right, or if you have any questions, anybody has any comments to make, please go ahead. Any thoughts on how you're thinking about your brand in terms of the attributes, Rashmi, that you're seeding into your startup?
I mean, one thing I realized is, in India we build good products, good technology, good features, but unfortunately we're not very packaging. Whereas when I saw the West, in spite of an average product, we still have great packaging and great entry happening through that. So what are your takes and observations on that?
I think My career, I've spent a lot of time in the food space, and I do agree with you that when it comes to packaging, I think just the way that people think about packaging and they design it is very different, and the way that we approach packaging is very cost forward, right? That it is secondary packaging, primary packaging. We get caught up in really the COGS, the cost of goods sold, rather than thinking about the tactile experience that the consumer is going to have. So it's very interesting. When Howard was raising money for Starbucks, and he showed the cup, the authentic white cup that you see, you hold the beverage. A lot of people said, "Oh my God, this is X dollars adding to your cost. Why don't you just replace this with a plastic cup?" And close to 18 or 20 investors that he was trying to pitch, really insulted him and said, "You've got to change this. You've got to change this." He says, "Absolutely not. This is my brand. This is the touch point that I'm thinking about." So one is having a lot of tactile design thinking, and whether you get it in Israel, whether you get it in Sweden or Nordic, and some of the companies that I've seen there, especially in the food tech, how they design their packaging, I think it is superior. My humble suggestion to you is don't approach it from a cost perspective. Always approach it from what you would love to see the consumer to see. Now, it's very easy to do it in a product way. It's very difficult when you're thinking about EdTech or a retail experience, right? So there, your packaging has to be your people, because your people are delivering your products or your service over there. So what are they like? How do they come across? And are they living your brand values is the way to think about it. So if you think about, let's say, a Taj Hotel, right? And they come in their beautiful uniforms. So if you think about Starbucks, they wear their green aprons. One of the simple processes that we early on put into the company is that the green apron is not washed in an Indian household. It's washed in a centralized laundry in each city where the store opens. Do you know why? Because we don't know what detergent, what water, and how you take care of the apron. The apron is the brand, right? You have to proudly wear the green apron when you deliver it. So at the back end, we make sure that the people who are wearing it are not burdened with the responsibility of taking care of it. That's a company cost. So you build that into your cost model. Even the cap that they wear, or the whatever else that they wear, they represent the brand. So everything that goes up right to the point where the customer delivery is happening is the ownership of the company. So don't be very cost forward. Don't go overboard. Think if it's a product very tactile, and think people and how they represent your brand when you're delivering it, right? Does that help you? Yeah, Rashmi?
Yeah, I have a question around it. So, how do you practice it, or how do you help people to imbibe it in the online world? So, I'll tell you the exact problem. Okay, so we have a gig workforce of around 350 coaches, right? Spread across India and outside India as well, right? With all those flexi hours and the time they want to spend and coach a learner, right? But the rigor and the care, the two values that we stand for, right? How do you ensure, or how do you build? So there are trainings in place, there are initiatives in place, right? But how do you see to it? What is a different approach? What can we do differently?
If you reflect on what you said there are initiatives and there are
trainings. So all those, So apart from that,
as a brand owner, if you have to inspire 1,000 people to deliver your service, you can't give them initiatives. Okay, you've got to give them rituals. So if you think about an Indian household, and we're all coming from very different backgrounds, right? Somebody may be a South Indian, somebody may be a North Indian. Think of the way the Indian household does a puja. There is a defined ritual of how to do it, what you wear, what you put into it. It's very, very sensorial, right? Chandan lagata hai, koi aarti karta hai, koi kapoor dalta hai, right? Every aspect of a ritual. What is a ritual? It's through the traditions of time, it comes down to you and it stays intact. So when you're thinking about 1,000 people delivering your brand to the next million, you have to work on it from a brain process perspective. You have to give them something so inspirational, and it's not a process that I have to follow. I have to craft it in the way that they will actually, do it with a lot of passion when it comes to delivery. So don't only think of processes, you're dealing with people to deliver your brand. So you have to win them over.
Yeah.
You have to get them to follow the rigor, the discipline. There's no hiding. You have to have a manual, you have to have the process nailed down. And the guy sitting next to you works on a lot of retail companies, so he'll tell you. But the way to craft it always has to be a ritual. Otherwise, it's not going to be remembered. So when I got introduced to coffee, I didn't like black coffee. I grew up in a middle-class household where girls were not allowed to drink tea coffee because you become dark. So I had a milky tea. So to drink black coffee was not, it was not palatable to me. But the whole ritual of how you smell it, the stories around coffee. So some of the brands that you really love, whether it's in the EdTech space or whether it's in the service industry or a product, they are usually crafted with a lot of thought on how human beings behave and how they adapt very quickly. So every process you design, if it has to be multiplied at several touch points, it has to become a ritual. You have to weave in this compelling story so that whether it's a gig worker, whether it's a full-time person, they actually deliver it with pride, right? Now this sounds very esoteric, it sounds very beautiful because I'm giving you an example of coffee, right? But you have to think of how you will craft your brand, create those rituals in the company, keep them simple and keep them manageable so that you can scale very quickly. But I wouldn't think of it from a delivery perspective as initiatives or process. Initiative is something which is short-lived and then becomes a process. So what you tell and how you tell your story, Rashmi, is very important. So one of the things you have to remember as a founder is that you're on a leadership journey. You're not on a value creation journey alone. You have to be extremely difficult with yourself. You have to make yourself uncomfortable. You have to learn new things because what you're writing today, you want so many more people to do it. And don't think of your consumers alone. Think of the people around you. So a little bit about all of this positioning also comes from how you internally build your brand. So the reason why brands like Starbucks are successful is because the people who love them and work for them are evangelists of the brand. And that happens because of the rituals, because of the respect, of the values and how the company treats you, right? So very quickly.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
The previous slide on attributes, you wrote standard, the standard cost of entry is the first sampling for a customer. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah. What I'm trying to tell you here is that as you think about your attributes, there are something which is standard, ticket to entry, and then you weave it, right? So just think of it as a needs-based, how you appeal to a person and there are different stages of needs. So that cost of entry is increasing. Alright, so very quickly, taking on from Rashmi's example, when you're thinking about a brand, it is very scientific. There are tools. If you go, I would encourage you to listen to some of these Harvard Innovation Labs. They're 10-year-old lectures, but they're very powerful. They give you a lot of frameworks. But always remember it's a mind game, right? It's not about how you feel about your startup or how, the guy sitting here thought about how NIIT would look like, and we will come to their case as well. But think of it of how the consumer is going to feel about it. A lot of people will discourage you from talking about emotions, feelings. Investors will say numbers dikhao, financials dikhao. But please remember, at the end of the day, you're dealing with human beings, whether they are the employees you want to attract or the consumers that you want to build. Those people don't care about the ROI or the return. They care about how much you love them and how you're going to show up. You have to understand them and attach yourself to them at an emotional level. So every time when you think about brand, this is a simple framework which a lot of branding agencies will use when they are crafting your brand. It's called the see, think, and do. Very simply, what do I see when I come to you? What do you want to achieve? What do you want me to think at a rational level? And then all your communication, whether it's Twitter, whether it's a pamphlet, whether it's a message that you send me, it has to make me feel something. Hopefully not repulsed, but something that will make me really, really attract myself towards your brand. And lastly, when you build that emotional hook, what do you want the consumer to do? Whether it's a coupon that you give for trial, whether it's a brand message that you send out, whether it's an evocative brand film, hopefully your investors fund you and you get to make a film. But please understand, the buck stops when they actually walk into your store or come back to you for a trial or engagement, right? And then you define your brand personality and the style. Now, why do I use words like emotion, style? Because that's how your consumers think. They're not coming to you to get a fantastic training. They are coming to change their lives, right? The first ad of NIIT, like Vijay was telling us, is If you're not being able to get into an engineering institute or an IIT, come to NIIT, it will change your life. Now, these sound like very tall claims. Obviously, you're going to work hard to fulfill those claims, but that's how you speak to the consumers, right? And I think somebody made a comment about the Western countries making better products. They also tell you fantastic stories that make it believable, right? So, just a recent example, when you watch Iron Man, you'll be very happy. The poor Indian guy decides to make a fictitious film about superheroes, nobody buys it, right? Because storytelling is an art. And that is where you will differentiate yourself. It's not just your tech. It's not that this phone is better designed than the Oppo phone or the OnePlus phone, right? Really doesn't even have a great battery. But you will never find anybody who can afford it not using this product. Because they are in love with what Steve Jobs told them, that you're different, you're artistic, you're a maverick, you're going to do something so great in the world. And that is what human beings are looking for. They're looking for the hope, the optimism, and emotional connect with you. And your employees, by the way, are also looking for the same, right? So get your employees to fall in love, make it a mission, and that's how you will craft into a great brand, right?
Just for the dialogue, I think it's not coming to understand your recipient, the emotion. See, the whole point is ultimately I'm a professor. I cannot tell what is not relevant or incorrect to my student.
Absolutely.
So I'm bound by that. Not I, everybody is bound by that.
So I'm not saying that, yeah.
So I'm from that point. So it's not better to say that, of course, the software also writes storytelling. I understand that. Spend time, do research, do that part.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that you build a brand around storytelling. It's not waking up in the morning and writing fictitious story plays. The idea here, as Professor Mankar, is that you have to have a very deep understanding of how people will behave with the service or the product that they're doing. And we talk a little bit about that in segmentation and the needs, right? So the 4 key takeaways, one of the important things is to understand what is the need that you're actually going to service, and whether several millions or billions of people have the same need for your idea to have potential to scale. So understanding the consumer is going to be very, very important, right? So let me come back to you. It will your question will be
answered. One comment in the previous slide. You mentioned it's all about how you make the customer feel about yourself. Now, one insight which is actually I find it very powerful is that let's say 100 customers walk into Starbucks in one day. For the Starbucks employee at the reception or the billing counter, each customer is one person. But for the customer, he or she is 100% to Starbucks. So that's where that whole get employees to fall in love and treat each customer as 100% and not 1% of the 100. I think it's something very important.
That's the mission of Starbucks. If you land up.
Sorry?
That's exactly the mission of Starbucks, actually. What you articulated and what you felt about is actually what the founder wrote. It's not about 25,000, today there are about 25,000 stores in 75 countries. But the mission is to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, one neighborhood at a time. So one of the greatest things about the company and the processes behind it is don't care about the SSSG, what we call as the sales growth of each store or the 200 customers. Make sure that the one that you deliver is exemplary. So every customer should get an exemplary experience because we're nurturing the human spirit one cup at a time. So you see how that links back to your entire business design. If your mission is powerful enough and crafted thoughtfully, and this was written years back when we started, right? He actually spent the time writing out the values and what he wanted to achieve at the end, and that is consistently delivered. So you'll see how, and we'll talk a little bit about it. This is where I wanted to get to. Write down what you want to achieve in the end, whether it's now or 40 years later, whether you were acquired by another company. Just write down where you want to end. And I'm going to invite maybe Raji and Vijay as well, because when I was inducted in the NIIT board, they actually shared this with me, that the two of them had actually written down the values, the vision, what they stood for, what are negotiables, what are non-negotiables for the customer and the employee. So I would encourage you, this is not frivolous work. People tell you about vision and mission. Please take the time. Most of you come from engineering or non-engineering backgrounds. This is scientific. Make it very true and believe in it. So any comments, Vijay and Raji? I think both of you are in the room, and I had put this down apart from Starbucks because I was quite inspired. It was a company that was about EdTech ways back when, years back, when people didn't fall in love with EdTech brands. Today they do, but how did they write? So please go ahead. What inspired you to write that when you started up?
Very long story.
In a short while.
Well, I think one of the things driving us was that we were finally getting to encounter where we go. So we hadn't written this before. We confronted the reality that now we are hiring people. And just three of us are not hiring anybody, including the other people whom we hired were to hire, for example. So we said, how do we make sure that what we intrinsically believe, which comes through in our conversation when we select people, that the next set of people will look at the same. This was one very important consideration because expansion. So this, when I look back at one of the comparisons. Second was when we were looking at where do we want to reach. Because we didn't write this when we started. But we did write bringing people and computers together successfully before we started. So we saw this and we saw that and we saw the gap. So for the first few decades, that was what was, we had written bringing people and computers together, and then Vijay added successfully. Few months or I don't know how much later, we said that anybody can bring people. So that, in a sense, was what we were pursuing. And by the way, that has changed a lot. Now we are saying helping people realize their potential. So we made that journey because then we were looking at one problem, and then as we went forward. But coming to this document, we were then trying to build something. And we were sitting at a time when things were exploding. Things were going very good. We said, when we grow, we have to think about what we become. So we made, those days there used to be a spreadsheet called Multiplan, which came before Lotus 1. So we would, three of us and there's another colleague of us, we would sit and think about what do we want to build, but what will it become was the question. So we would build, we would use Multiplan to say this grows 2% and that grows 5%, and it was, I think, 15 years later in 2000, what will it be? And then we discovered that all of those projections were assumptions which were varying. And we said there has to be something which is a little more consistent with the machine. And that is actually what forced us to say, okay, what will remain the same?
So what will end? Where will you end up?
So therefore, actually, this document is wrongly titled.
Okay.
Because we were making a little book to say what's the vision 2020 2000. But there were chapters, and there was one chapter of values and beliefs. This is that page. But the whole thing was called our vision. It's simply not a vision in terms of where we will be, but who we are. So this actually captures what we really felt in our bones about how we will live this life.
Yeah. Does that help you?
About how we will live.
Startup lens. He thought of it at that point in time, and he actually articulated it and wrote it down. Right. So
If I may add, on the other side, when I joined in 1987 from campus, this was the first session which 31 of us I think joined, and Raji took for us for 2 hours. And I think in every induction program, I have taken it many times when I was in NIIT, probably 40, 50 times. Then regional managers, frontline managers, zonal managers, they would discuss that, and repetition of these sessions with stories behind each of these words. And they spoke about storytelling. And that is, I stayed for 24 years till 2011. So the stories used to be told, how we actually did in this situation. And when there is no rule book, and I practice that as a center manager, branch manager, if there is no rule book, there's no procedure laid down by HR or a business guys, and if there's a student standing in front, I would apply this and do it. And there have been many instances, and then we'll see later. So I thought I'll just, for a friends.
I think the one thing to think about is that he remembers it, right? He's been with the company for a long time. You're working with a very fickle base of people. Both your consumers and your employees are young, they're fickle, they're promiscuous. So how do you get them engaged with something as esoteric as values or what you stand for? And I think the best thing that you could do is take a lot of learning from any religion, right? If you think about religion, they are one of the most powerful brands on earth. And you can kill me outside this room for saying that, but actually that is the truth because they understand human psychology, human behavior, and then they put it in. One of the ways I saw very successfully, how do companies live their values, right? You can't, it's not a school, it's not a university, it's the paycheck that you get. So how do you build that emotional connect is by actually weaving in a lot of processes and rituals of appreciating and recognizing people when they live the values. Okay, so just to give you an example, one of the things that Starbucks really does well is that they encourage people to love coffee. But when you do it right, they recognize it, whether it's a Coffee Master program that you enroll and you can become that. They actually have, they used to have, I don't know if they still practice it, there were value cards. So values is very difficult, right? It's very boring. It sounds like your parent or somebody's talking to you. So we actually crafted very simple behaviors of what you do and how do you demonstrate the value. So don't tell me you have to love coffee. How do you love coffee? How are you respectful to your peer, right? The team member. How are you honest? What is integrity? So they have little cards, and what you have to do is that within your team, every week, you gave somebody a card that stood for the value they demonstrated. Right? So if you thought that I gave outstanding consumer service or I was a great learner on my coffee journey, at the recognition, at the team meeting, they would give you a card that went into your apron. So if you go to the back of house of a coffee store, there is a green apron with your name of each member. There are pockets onto it. The more cards I get, it's a kind of a recognition that I'm living the values of the company. It's very simple, but it's very, very impactful. The more cards I collect, the prouder I feel. I have framed the 4 cards that I got in Seattle in the store that I trained. I still have them because those people gave it to me. They didn't know I was training to be the market leader. They just thought I was a barista, but they gave me. So that is the way you have to think about driving your employee behavior and your customer behavior. The recognition and successful implementation of achieving a ritual is very important. Now, if you think about whichever religion that you belong to or the faith that you follow, religion also has that. You're always taught, if you do this, you will get this. It's very simple, right? But how do you translate that into a process is the task that you as a leader or the founder have. You've got to think about it, and it's not that you have to copy anything that everybody else does. You can come up with your own rituals and your own practices. Reinforcement is very, very important, especially when you're scaling, whether it's your employees or your consumers. So the fancy way of saying it is reward programs. If you open people's wallets, they will have a Vistara, a Starbucks, or the time that I started working at Jet Airways cards. Right? Because those miles, those points were so important. So one of the things that we tested when we were doing a loyalty program is we went around the office and asked 50 people to open their wallets and show us the loyalty cards that they carry. The loyalty card at that time was expensive to print. Today it's on the phone. If you're designing a program by which you want to hook the consumer, you've got to make sure that the reinforcement is powerful so that he actually comes back to you, because that drives your frequency, that drives your business and revenue, right? So just a little bit, I think we skipped a couple of slides. Let me just go back. So this is a summary, and a very important lesson, something that you must remember is consistency. And the Western world has taught us that. They're anal about their processes, they're anal about how they craft something. You will constantly find the companies measuring. Japan taught us that, right? Quality. But consistency is even more important, especially in the service business, because if the experience is not consistent, you're not going to be able to hook the consumer on. And what do you think about when you're designing your brand in the startup? It's about you, it's about your people, it's about your culture, and most importantly, how you execute. Every morning, whether it's a gig worker, whether it's your consumer, You've got to make sure this guy or this lady comes up and shows up as an employee or a consumer at your door. So how you execute is really the one that you have to find. And that's the fun of being a leader, right? You have to ensure that everybody is executing it the way that you envision. Yeah? Any comments on this, on consistency or brand? So I think we've spoken a lot about it, but this is basically talking about if you're consistent, then you will be building what is called as brand integrity. And this is very important. It's not about printing the logo in the right way. It's about delivering it at every touch point, right? So if you are consistent, you have to be very simple in articulating what is it that you're delivering. In Starbucks case, great coffee beverage, great third place, amazing staff, right? So that's consistency. These are the values with which the company is driven, and we spoke about it. And the values of your company do imprint your brand attributes, especially in a service business. How you treat your people is how your people are going to treat your consumers. Please don't forget that, and make sure that everybody in the company that you hire knows that. So having the right values woven into the people who work for you is very important. And then reliability and consistency, right? The example I gave you. Our barista promise, love your beverage or let us know, we always make it right. That's a very big promise and a very big commitment to make. That's how you build brand integrity, and that's how your consumers will understand and love your brand. Right? Positioning. So you've understood what your values are, what you're going to stand for, but there's competition, right? So how do you, in a world where people's attention span is less than 3 seconds, how are you going to make sure that you build an enduring brand and an enduring company, which not only people love, but come back to again and again, right? So positioning is really occupying a space in the consumer's minds. Professor Mantar, that's where you come about talking about what are the needs, what is it, the dialogue that you want to have with the consumer, is it relevant? Are you even relevant in the millions and zillions of things that this consumer is doing? And more importantly, from an investor perspective, are you really finding the right white space in the market, or is it just your imagination that this is a white space? So one of the things a founder who's fairly successful told me that when he was building his Tata, he said, I know at least 300 other people are solving the same problem. Right? He actually knew that. He says, and he's of course delivered Ilmicon in India and is well known in the West Coast. But he said, I know that millions of others are going to be doing this. But how do I make sure that my delivery or my solution is so differentiated from a brand perspective, from the process perspective, that I build an enduring company? So we're going to talk a little bit about how do you find the white space and just a few tools of how you think about it. Positioning is not a random statement about I'm the greatest brand. Apple doesn't position itself saying, I'm only for the Maverick. That is how you perceive it, and that's the marketing communication. But for you as a company who's crafting the positioning, I think these are the relevant questions you need to answer, right? Who is your TG and who is the beachhead? I think it was your question that when you start building an organization, how do you really focus? So think of small number of people that you can convince and get a test case, and then start building more. So when you're defining your brand or your product or service, I think find the beachhead. So if you're selling electronic cars, it's unlikely that my father will buy an electronic car. But a 30-year-old who's got a fancy job wants to make sure that having a beer or talking to his friends, he's going to say I'm environmentally conscious, is probably my TG. So early on, you've got to really segment the market and understand who is your TG. Why are they dissatisfied with what is there out there in the market? Then what is your product? What is the solution capability that you're bringing? And how is it different? How is it unlike an alternative? If there are 300 other alternatives, how are you still going to stand apart is important. All right, so how do you think about it? Right, just a very simple framework and questions that you should ideally ask. And I know a lot of you are building tech products, so I put it in there. You think of the consumer, where everybody, the other 300 guys who are trying to solve the same problem. What does your company stand for, and what is your context? Are you in India? Are you in Silicon Valley? Is this your second startup? Is it your first startup? Who's going to back you? What are the set of mentors? What is your context? How are you able to attract people? And the questions to ask, and please do it ruthlessly, do it with people who don't like you. my sincere and humble request is don't do this with your co-founder. Please don't do it with a prof who liked you. Please don't do it with your angel investor or your mentor. Go with somebody that hates you, somebody who's smarter than you are, and have this dialogue with them. Preferably, if you are building it the right way, have this dialogue with the consumer. Don't have it with friends and family. Is your idea unique enough? And most importantly, what is the barrier to entry? Is it your approach? How many of you remember the launch of OnePlus Home? Yeah.
Invite only.
It was a big thing then, right? Facebook had done it, and then a phone company did it, invite only, and everybody wanted it, right? They wanted that invite only. It didn't cost them anything. I haven't met the founder, but I read about this. The guy who's building out a chai brand in India. He's got 300 outlets, as many as Starbucks after 10 years. Guess what his campaign on Valentine was? Singles are welcome. He said, I will give you a free beverage on Valentine if you're a single. He got 3,000 consumers. Multiply that by the ad that you have to do on Google and the conversion rate to acquire 3,000 customers in that city. Right? Innovative, unique, but the go-to-market or his entire ability to attract that customer in the conversation was unique. And he was fighting against Starbucks, Chai Point, a number of them. So be frugal, be creative. Your approach has to be differentiated. And most importantly, is it sustainable? Sorry for the typo there, and most importantly also, is it congruent to your core value? Don't do anything which is inauthentic. And please, this is a very important question, and especially for startups who founders are, you have to be alpha, you have to carry a team, you have to impress your investors, you have to say the right things. But when you're dealing with human beings, which is your employees and your consumers, please don't do anything which is inauthentic, because you're setting yourself up for failure. If you work in the short term, it's not going to do anything which is going to build anything which is enduring. So make sure your core value is something which is your anchor, and any decisions that you make in your strategic aspects are very true to what you stand for. Otherwise, trust me, you're going to fail. It's as simple as that. If you do anything inauthentic early on, the inauthenticity shows up. Because you don't have people who love you. You're not Nike, you're not Starbucks, you're not Tata, you're not NIIT. You have to craft your own brand, and this is the currency which your investors won't talk about, but it's called trust. So do something which is very authentic, especially when you're answering some of these important questions, right? Okay, so how do you find this magical white space? We'll just take a moment. Everybody seems to like the matrix. You don't have to go to McKinsey or a fancy P school. All of us think of it in very simplistic terms. So what you think about is, what are the two attributes, and choose your axis very well. What is important? So for example, in a category where there is a very involved purchase, trust is very important. Right? If you came out with food, a low involvement product, or a new beer, people will try you. If you talked about buying a 30 lakh car, you have to have the trust of the consumer. So you have to come from a space of credibility. So think of the two axes very well, size up your competition, map them out, and then if you're lucky, you will find the space that you can occupy. But the most important thing to do here when you're defining the axis is to think about what are the barriers and what is important to the consumer. Yeah, I don't know how many of you apply these frameworks, but I think they're not theoretical. They're absolutely real, and people who build great brands actually, even an agency I know, which we work with extensively, asks for what are the white spaces that you're going after, because there are limited white spaces and there are 3,000 people trying to attack them. So have this dialogue very early on, sit down and actually map out, and then you can say whether it's 300 consumers, whether it's a billion consumers, you're fortunate, you're building something in India, the numbers could be quite large for you in the white space. So anybody wants to be vulnerable enough to talk about the white space that they're addressing? It's okay. I mean, you don't have to volunteer. I know your projects and your ideas are close to your heart, but how are you thinking about white space? Any comments on this? Because you have a bunch of people here who will also contribute to it.
I think we as a brand are helping women in tier 2, tier 3 cities become supremely independent and confident. And we believe very less education companies are actually addressing the problem of helping women come back to workforce, and there's huge amount of potential in tier 2, tier 3 cities with millions of women. And we believe that's a big white space where can you craft amazing learning experiences which actually make these women independent and empowered. So that is the white space that we are addressing as from an audience standpoint.
So think of the axis a little bit more focused because you're talking about potential and numbers, right? A lot of other companies could come out, Baiju's could launch a program like that, just being provocative so that you think a little bit deeper about it. But what is it that you will own and what is it that Baiju's can't do in a good way that you can do to attract the tail to grow, right?
So I think
You don't have to answer it. I'm just saying if you've got the axis, then and if you find that you want to have the dialogue and nail that down, the definition of white space is not about just the potential or the number of people that you're targeting. That's more about target segmentation and scale. But white spaces are very, very critical to define. It is the problem which is most important that you're solving, and the two things that you put on the axis have to come from a space that the consumer is actually looking for it, and your approach is going to create a differentiation.
any example would be actually
So I think I can. So in our case, because we used to be like, so we are this platform with a lot of experts sharing their experience in the form of video works. It's very regular for us to be compared with any other mentor-mentee platform. And a mentor-mentee platform may be a list of mentors, right at the start of starting Expertrons, we thought of we have to kind of approach it in a way that there is a differentiation factor to the whole thing. And that's where our approach was towards the content building of it. Like we will not just list mentors and mentors on a platform. We'll actually get some content from these experts on our platform. And that would mean while we started, it was very difficult to get the first 100 experts from our batch, our seniors and everything. But now we have 7,500 experts and into 15 minutes of content each. And this content basically now becomes our differentiation. Like even today, if everything is stopped at our company, this content, this huge content library and the video bot, the technology which we built, we have filed an IP for it. So all of that kind of becomes a differentiator. And one more example, like how I think Amazon and all these guys also wanted to kind of create a differentiation while they started the books thing. They said, let us get, they were just selling books and they were like, anyone else can come in and sell books. But the differentiation they tried to create was, let us make reviews written on their platform. So they had for all those 10,000 books, they made people write reviews for it, and there were so many reviews for the books written that now anyone else who wants to start, they're like, hey, how do I make 10,000 reviews written on those books? So some
building
differentiation.
trust, right? We're talking about building trust, which is very difficult, right? If you're a Tata company and you said you're targeting to tier 2 women, they would obviously give it a trial because you have a brand which stands for something in the market. Think of stuff like a Zomato, or think of a company which actually disrupts it, right? So if you go a little deeper into why online delivery works, it's because people today consume food very differently from when we used to consume as children, right? As a child, a Saturday or a Sunday, your mom wanted a break, you went to a restaurant, it was an outing, food was by the way, you were just happy to get the food, you had a budget depending on whichever SEC that you belong to. Today, food and cricket, everything is a communal activity. You don't just necessarily do it with your friends, with your family, but also with your friends. And now it's not just 4 friends getting together. There are 15 couples who come over to watch a match. So everybody wants to eat differently. So what does a Zomato or a Swiggy or an online delivery does for you? It is creating the white space. What is the white space? I want variety. And I want to reach out to a lot more people without having the fixed cost of owning a restaurant. That's why dark kitchens and the delivery ecosystems are born. So white spaces are also a function of shifting consumer behavior and what they hold value. And you have to be able to define that so that you can build a moat. Yeah? Okay. So that's about defining a white space. And very importantly, Professor Mankad, to your question, startups think they have a disruptive model, and hopefully these guys do. They have disruptive technology, but you have to find a new market and a go-to-market for which you need to understand what is the consumer need, right? And this is very basic. You've got to figure out what is the unmet need that the consumer has, or even if it is being met, it is being met by a substandard product or service. And is your solution disruptive, defensible, and discontinuous to actually serve what is underserved and what is unique? So that's how you really target or segment, and that's the third strategic decision that you need to take, because once you've defined the positioning, it comes from a place of how do you target the consumer market, right? This is very, very important. And how do you come to it, and why is this important, right? The question of focus. So if you've got to do 5 things, do at least 3 and get them right to 100%. Don't worry about the other 2, because you have a lot to do. If you define a consumer segment, your product, packaging, how you communicate with them, everything depends on a target consumer, right? The way you talk to a millennial, the way that the ads that Zomato runs for you and me are very different from the way they run ads for teens or for older people, or somebody where they're servicing in a Coimbatore versus a Bombay, right? So you've got to really deeply think about this. And this is a very simple framework. I'll give you the source. You can go and read more about it. Is it small? Is it easy to target this entire consumer set that you define? And this is called minimum viable product and minimum viable segment. The word viable is very important, because you also have to win trust of your investors who are going to ask you, is it profitable to do so? And now with the winter in startup funding, this becomes even more important to understand that at least there are 1,000 customers that I have who I'm servicing in a viable fashion. This is the value I'm creating for them. If you get those 1,000 right with the 3 service elements, you have a winner. Rather than trying to widen the market a little bit more and trying to say I'm going to do all of it. So that brings us to the question that Professor asked is about needs and how are you going to deliver and reference it, right? So if you find that the market potential, like he said, there are 49% of tier 2 population is women, this is the age bracket, this is the potential. But can I successfully deliver this in Trichure or let's say in Lucknow, and can I deliver it such that at least 1,000 of these women now start talking about my program and how it has affected them, how it has changed their lives. So this is about referenceability of your product or your service and getting it, and it's definitely based on needs. And you've got to create and find that initial segment. Is it a Coimbatore? Is it a Lucknow? Is it a Siliguri? Which is a segment that I'm going to go in and demonstrate success with minimum value product and minimum viable segment. Because after that, in a country like China, defining the larger segment and winning that over is easy. So I would urge you to focus on smaller groups. And it's a tough battle, right? You may have discovered an idea which is really possible to give to a lot of people. But demonstrating success in smaller pieces is going to be very important to build confidence, not just for your investor, but also your employees, because they have to stay engaged in the process, right?
What means beachheads?
Beachheads are the initial, like a light pole, they are the consumers who first embrace, the early adopters in your cycle, right? So focus is...
So 2 things come to my mind. So 2 things come to my mind. You talked of needs, and I'm going to needs.
Sorry, it's Jeffrey Moore's reference, if you want to just Google that beachhead. Go ahead, Professor.
I'm just going back to the previous slide, needs to talk. Don't have to go back to the slide, needs. I'm not going back to the first thing, that start with the end customer, end delivery. So normally in engineering or design, I always make a feed forward design. I never begin with, though retirement is certain, but I have to plan or I don't plan. Just like, sometimes within a conceptual thing I'm saying just now, that with birth comes the death. So should I celebrate the birth or should I mourn the birth? So I'm just putting the future part comes into picture. Future part comes into picture. So when it comes to need, defining now. And I have been defining needs, but I always go wrong in terms of those needs. So that's the one question comes to my mind. And
So the question is, how do you define the need, or is it how you balance between?
No, really define needs. I should have a strategy to define my needs. And we still define my needs. And if I go back to the first one, how the founders must have decided they need that time. You have to detail it further now, right?
Okay.
So I go that way. So Is there a process?
Sure. I was going to cover that as I talk about inbound marketing, but do you think Howard Schultz thought that consumers needed a coffee place? Did you ever think you needed a third place between your work and home to have a conversation with anyone? Was that really a need?
Not between.
Not really, right?
Understand.
No, it wasn't a need, right? It wasn't really a need. Sorry, I'm trying to find the slide that I had made on the needs, and if we can go back to it. I think it was emotions and the need. It's probably in the backup. But if you think about it, Starbucks doesn't stand just for coffee, right? It stands for how you feel when you go inside a store. And below that, if you just dig a little deeper, it's the need to connect with people and to have a safe haven where you can sit and relax in a day. Today, of course, Wi-Fi is an important part of that entire experience. So coffee is, by the way, it's actually the conversation, and the third piece, which is a need, which is actually very basic to you and me. Right? Even in this university, the most interesting conversations will happen at your canteen. Because that's a space where you're comfortable being vulnerable. So the definitive idea behind this brand is not to give you world-class coffee or a 3% of Arabica coffee or a Frappuccino. It's to the human aspect of having an occasion and a time and a place for people to connect. And that's how the brand is actually designed.
That's what you call emotion?
That's what you call need, right? I have an intrinsic need to connect with another human being. I have an intrinsic need to find a place where I can be myself, because I can't be myself at home and work. Right? How many of you are yourselves at home and work? No. You only let your guard down when you're watching IPL or T2 or with your friends or a beer. You need those spaces, and they've been there for generations. If you think about war times, or if you think about various violent times, a coffee shop or a cafe will be part of every culture. So that is the basic need of the understanding. And then how do you create your differentiation around it, and how do you build that is what you think about. Does that make sense? So his need is probably that the tier 2 person doesn't have access to whatever that he is offering, and giving that access in a meaningful way is something that he can differentiate. Right?
So can that also be the difference between a need and a want? So need may be more nutrients and want will be more known.
So I would urge you to look at this section on Harvard Innovation Labs. They talk about aspirational needs, they talk about latent need. My example comes from an aspirational need of a coffee shop. For tech, there are urgent underserved needs, right? So you can identify them. Read about more in terms of Maslow's theory, if that resonates with you. But try and find something which is an enduring need and a problem that you can recurrently solve, depending on the kind, the model that you are thinking about. But identifying the consumer need is like the pain point. So I think somebody mentioned about B2B versus B2C. How do you find customer pain and gain is the concept of a B2B, and what is a need is more for a B2C kind of a business model, right? And just to answer your question, it's very important in the initial part, and that's where you have the role of a founder. Your role is not easy. You've taken up a very difficult job, so you have to admit that. You have to think long term, but you also have to have laser sharp focus today. Because if you get lost in the long term, defining it is one thing. Writing out your values is another. But you have to also focus so that the 10, 20, 100 people as you scale are focused on delivering what you want, where you want to go. Similarly, you may think that entire tier 2 India is your target market, but you have to demonstrate success and be focused on one or two to build trust. Again and again, please remember, currency of trust has to be earned. You cannot be traded. You have to, at every stage of your founding life, build trust with your employees, build trust with your investors and your stakeholders. I can guarantee you if these 3 trust you, your consumer will trust. That's a very basic principle. So earning trust is important, and these are the behavioral aspects you need to think about. You don't have the luxury to only dream big. You also have to focus immediately, because what would you rather do? Would you want to fail and then pivot, as it's commonly known in our startup world, or would you rather earn success early on and then expand? Right? It's a difficult choice, depends on your model. I'm not discouraging you from thinking big, but please remember that you have to earn trust every step of the way. Right? So focus is important. Now a little bit about tactic, and we spoke about the needs into this question. How do you think about it? How do you really translate it? It's usually not your tech solution that people are looking for. it is a bigger problem that they are solving. And for the guys who are into B2B, and humble submission, I have not done B2B sales, but I kind of learn and keep my mind open. This is a framework that seemed to make sense to me about how you think of your customer journey. So in the center, if you focus on the awareness, interest, understanding, what are the things that are in your control are really on the left side. What the consumer pain points are is really here. So understanding this is very important, and those are the gains that you can offer to your consumer. So typical gain and pain model, and what could be the risks? Is it switching cost? Is it not doing anything? Is the current software working fine for my company? I don't need you. And usually, a lot of companies that are built in India think that Indians are very value conscious. So price ठीक नहीं है, बहुत महंगा है, right? We saw a student presentation where the variable was $7,000. And a few people sitting next to me said, "Oh my God, this is not going to work." It's actually not that. If you dig a little deeper, and especially in a country like India, you're in a supermarket, because if you win here, you can win anywhere else. They're looking for value, and until you give them that value, the price is going to be the superficial reason that they give you. So even for B2B sales, I think it's very important to remember that the customer pain is something that you have to understand. If you are delivering a software product to a company, how are you going to service it? How are you going to support it? What is the cost of implementation? And this model, and the speaker there also talks very interestingly about in B2B sales, as we think of consumer segments, he calls them actors and personas, right? So if you're selling to an organization, there is an entire gamut of people that you go to. There is a tech head who's a visionary, there's a CEO who's worrying about what latest tech he's using, but there is below them the economic decision maker. So there are different actors, and he uses a beautiful analogy on it. I urge you to read it for those who are doing B2B sales. Understanding, even in a B2B context, who are the decision makers, who are the influencers, who are the visionaries, who are the people who are going to write the check, who are going to implement your tech. Understanding each of their requirements and catering to that is only when you will fall through the funnel and you will come out successful. So this is just a B2B example and a framework which I thought would be thought-provoking. And then beautifully captured in this model is also what's in your control and what's not in your control, right? So as a startup founder, you're typically struggling, you think everything is out of control. So on the left side is what the consumer controls, and what you have in your control are the levers, right? So literally driving your marketing and sales cycle through this. So how can you accelerate the consumer from one stage to another? And a typical tech example is you give slippery products, you give free stuff. So figure out what is the lever that you can use in your arsenal at a viable cost to actually help them move through. If you hit the brake, this is a very important part of the journey. If the consumer breaks and doesn't accept your product, please go back and speak to detractors. Even if things are going right and you're scaling up, don't forget to talk and listen to people who did not embrace the service. Because that is the gold mine that you're sitting on. It is an opportunity to constantly improve and understand. Please don't give surveys actively as a founder or as your key leadership team members. Please go out there and listen to consumers. So in one of the companies that I ran, and one of the most successful consumer brands in India, Titan, the leadership has a target of speaking to close to 50 consumers every quarter. Whether you're a CMO, whether you're a store manager, whether you're a CEO, and this is a discipline a lot of good companies follow. So talk to consumers who love you, but at the early stages, please talk to people who are applying brakes, whether it's in a B2B context or a B2C context. You will learn a lot, right? The clutch is the consumer is undecided. And it is an inertia or a risk, and you need to change the gear. So this is your opportunity to innovate, elevate your service, change your product features, find out why that consumer is in a space of, an indecision. So this is a cycle as you think about it, of how you engage with your consumers. And please remember that much as driving a car, there are a lot of controls in your hand, right, in your team. Don't go back to thinking that I don't have the money. I think today with the net and the way that you all are building your businesses in today's time, I think there's opportunity and funds available, but just do it very thoughtfully and keep going through this cycle. Change gears and ensure that you're talking to consumers who are not loving you at the early stage. That's very, very important in my view. Okay, and it's great to talk strategy and to talk about execution. But one of the greatest learnings I've had and in the companies that I've had the fortune of working is if something is not measured, if something is not rewarded, it's never going to give you the result. So measuring is very important, right? Think of school, everything was measured. What time you came in, what time you said your prayers, or how you scored, did you pay attention in class? And today's schools and university have an effort grade and an exam grade. Measuring is very important. And make sure that you build that as a value in your company. Sorry, I'm sounding very, almost imposing this on you, but I would urge you to do it because it's very important as you're building something out. You don't know what the final product is going to look like, what's going to hit out there. You're indecisive. So please test everything. Go back and measure it, whether it's employee training, whether it's the product features, whether it's engagement with a mentor, mentee. Think about what could go wrong. And put in measures everywhere and constantly monitor it. The minute you stop monitoring, right, and you're mostly building a data-driven companies, trust me, you'll lose control. So much of what you want to do here is not possible unless you're measuring everything. And it's super, right? With conversion rates, the way that you do your marketing today, it is so much more measurable. Then think of building a startup when Unilever was dominating the consumer space. Today, Unilever wants to buy out all the insurgent brands that are coming out because they're built on referrals, they're built on viral marketing, they're not built on TV campaigns, right? A very, very successful brand in the consumer space, which I love, is called EdTech Fresh. It sells EdTech Batter. It never advertised for 7 years. But in those 7 years, I saw it in the local grocery store, which is called General Trade. I saw it in the Reliance and the Nature's Basket, which is called Modern Trade. And I found it on Amazon. So he built a great product, nothing fancy, it's the EdTech Batter, consistency, great values. Mustafa, like you, is a techie, was an engineer, and actually built out this company because he spent about 3 or 4 years working at his maternal, maternal uncle's shop. And he understood that distribution is the only way to win in India. It is not about the sexy commercial that you will create. So another very interesting brand, I don't know if you've tried, called Paperboat. Yeah. Spent $1 million to create a beautiful campaign about India. Right? I don't know how many people saw the Paperboat ad. Google it when you see it. He built a beautiful, emotional, evocative campaign. Everybody showed it at different conferences. Everybody fell in love with this guy. Right? He's created this beautiful, he's selling Nibu Pani, Indigo was selling it on that. Go back and look at the sales of both companies. EdTech Fresh is over 1,000 crore, Paperboat is struggling at 100 crores. Why? Because he didn't solve the distribution. Fantastic case study for founders to go through about building modes, of course, Paperboat got a lot of things right. It got a lot of consumers to fall in love with them. But was it a sustainable model? What were you solving for and shape? If you're going to compete with Unilever, with Tata, with the works, if you don't have distribution, there's no point in creating a beautiful commercial because the commercial will reach 1 million people, but they don't know where to buy your product. Everybody doesn't fly Indigo, right? So to get the trial of the product and to get it right, pick the problem that you want to solve for, right? So measure at every stage. And I think it's 1:14, so I'm in time. This is just one summary slide which captures the messaging. In terms of managing your brand from the start, position something which is very unique and defendable, target based on needs which are enduring, drive your marketing cycle. Rashmi, even if you don't like cars, you love them. And GTM is strategic and tactical, but everything has to be measured because, guys, this is not about writing your values alone. It's about execution, measure, execute, measure, execute, measure. Because you have to earn trust, right? So listen, learn, lead, iterate, and pivot very quickly.
In NIIT, those first 15 years, there were 5 or 6 parameters which were measured every day, tracked every day by the individual counselor, the branch manager, the regional manager, and Mr. Kadani and Mr. Pawar. Within 24 hours, the report seems to reach. Things like V by R by, I would explain those ratios, P by E, okay? Some of those 4-5 things where even I remember even now, after so many years, from counselor to the CEO, they were looked at every day. Within 24 hours, that needs to be
I think there's no substitute for rigor and for discipline. And as a founder, you've got to find whether you are naturally like that or you're going to acquire it and consciously build that up. Because again, you have to inspire employees who are going to service your customers if you don't have a solid product. It's not like I can make an ID fresh and expect billions of people to love the product, or I have to do a Starbucks, the barista has to be happy with the thing, otherwise I can open a beautiful store, you'll have shitty service, you'll never go back, right? CCD, classic example, we all grew up with cafe coffee, they died naturally because the principles on which the business are built, and I'm not even referring to any controversy on his financial reporting, but just how you treat your people and how you measure. And most interesting thing about measuring stuff is you can have a very meaningful dialogue. It is not in the realm of I think so or I felt so. The results are here, and then I can guide it with whatever analysis that I am doing. So having meaningful dialogues, whether you're on the spot with an investor or with a customer or with an employee who's difficult, whether you want to retain the employee or get rid of him or her, if you've not measured results, especially with the millennial workforce, forget it. Forget consumers falling in love. Employees will hate you and destroy your brand. So measuring stuff has a very, very important piece in what you do. Sorry, you had a question.
It was a very thought-provoking session and much required because as startup founders, mostly we are in the trenches fighting our own wars, and a lot of time we are not able to zoom out. So I think this session was excellent. One question was, if you could go back to the previous slide and keep it very quick. The clutch, accelerate and brake thing. Now if you look at, even before this, there was a slide, accelerate, brake and clutch. So if you look at the clutch part, what is mentioned is that most likely the customers view your product as one of the products. This applies more to education and EdTech in general. Had it not been the case, companies like they would not have earned their reputation for forcing down the product up the customer's throat or other companies. And had it not been for this, you would see most of the companies in EdTech today, 50 to 70% of the funding that they are raising is spent on only one thing, that is branding. So, no matter how innovative you make a product, customers are a lot of time in EdTech. Harvard is always going to remain Harvard. But all the new universities that we talk about, universities or EdTech, which is the non-traditional, non-branded kind of thing, it's very difficult to make the customer see that how you're different. You can say X, Y, Z things, etc. They will buy it, but again, there will be 10 more things that are happening in the market and 10 more players who are saying the same thing exactly. And no matter you say this, that, you have to have that kind of investment. So I'm not sure that the question to you is that, especially in EdTech, which is effort oriented, आपको पहले मेहनत करनी पड़ेगी तब आपको result मिलेगा, right? How do you build that kind of brand? Because no company has been able to do that honestly without pumping millions of dollars in sales force, thousands of people selling the same thing day in and day out. So any ideas around?
So I would love for you to spend a little bit more time on, where is the white space? I think if you've not defined the white space very well, it's going to be very, very difficult. And I'm going to take a consumer and retail example here. I don't have an EdTech example except NIIT, and you have the force of creativity here, so I would urge you to spend time with them. Think of Titan. They had 80% share in watches. They own the watch market because they had a JV with HMT, which manufactured it, right? In 1998, they decided to get into jewelry, right? And except for 4 or 5 people in the company, and they were very, very bright people, so it's this Desai, a brilliant maverick thinker who actually started in brought Titan to where it is. Everybody thought he was smoking pot when he said that he's going to compete with a local jeweler to sell gold jewelry. It was very tough. And they went wrong, they didn't make money for 5 years, and it wasn't a company, it was a listed company. They didn't have the luxury of being a startup where they could report losses or they could have funding agencies. It was very difficult to convince an Indian person to buy branded gold jewelry. Jewelry is what you bought from your local guy, he knew your mother or your sister or your father, families, everybody bought it there. In their lifetime, when they actually changed the market and when the consumer applied the clutch, they said, you're charging me huge making charges, it doesn't make sense for me to go. You may be Tata, you may be making great steel, you may be making cars, you may be running airlines, but I'm not going to buy gold jewelry. They didn't see value, right? Because you were not telling them or communicating to them. They also spent money on advertising. They actually did a very interesting thing. They made an advertisement where the Indian woman is throwing the gold jewelry on the floor. They did this early on. And they thought it struck a beautiful idea. They started branding, marketing, they opened more stores. Do you know what happened? They got further alienated. Not the clutch, the consumer just put a brake on their bloody proposition. They said this doesn't make sense. The insight there was, you're not respecting the Indian housewife. Please understand, the consumer may be very emotional and may have several choices, but never disrespect the intellect of the consumer. You have not struck the right chord. Humbly, you have to accept that. They did a lot of work with a guy called Santosh Desai, who actually did a lot of inciting with the consumers, and they realized that, oh my God, this brand has actually made a mistake because you can't throw gold on the floor. It's just sacrilege for an Indian to see that. So they had alienated the consumer to that extent. A few quarters later, they actually struck upon the idea that if we are Tatas and we stand for trust, how do we earn the trust? So look at the dilemma of the leadership team. You're Tatas, people intrinsically trust you, but they don't want to buy gold jewelry from you because they don't believe that you're bringing any value to you. I can buy it from this whatever XYZ, not from Das or whoever is my local share. What they did is they understood that gold purity is very important to the Indian consumer, the caratage. Now there was no measure to actually, and no jeweler could tell you. You just have to trust the jeweler that he's 24 carat, 20 carat, 18 carat. I don't know how many of the guys have bought jewelry, but that is a caratage, the purity of gold. They actually invested a lot into inciting and came up with a machine that demonstrated what is the purity of your jewelry. It's called a caratometer. The minute they did that, the entire unorganized sector in India was up in arms against them. Because now, Mrs. Sharma walked into a Karolbagh Titan Tanishq store, put her jewelry there, at least for trial, right? They intrigued the interest of the consumer. Purity है कि नहीं? Of course है. आपने आपको बोला है pure है. हमारे पास से आप सदियों से whatever years you've been buying. The minute Mrs. Sharma walked into the Karolbagh store and found out it was 16 carat and not 22, the brakes were lifted because I trusted this guy, they didn't trust me. Fast forward 20 years later, it's the most valuable consumer brand in our country, both from a stock exchange, from a consumer, from a retail experience. What they did is they earned the trust of the consumer. And Tatas had to earn it, you also have to earn it. So I would urge you to think about it. Please build something which is sustainable. Go back and find out. It is hard. You have to do it. You may not have to support Santosh Desai. Talk to the consumers who are pressing the clutch and the brake. There is something, if you talk to consumers who actually bought Byju's, and when I joined the board, Rajesh and Kashmir, talked to a few consumers, they are so dissatisfied. You all are sitting on a bunch of very unhappy people who are very aspirational. It's just that you have to find the right way to talk to them. I don't have the answer or the solution of how to do it, but I can guarantee you that if a Tata company had to go back and figure out how to earn trust, we jolly well do it. And it didn't take a lot of money to buy the caratometer and put it in stores. They actually put it in 50 or 100 stores around the country. But that was the turning point for that company because that told them the guys you trusted. So if Byju's has cheated you, how is it that Ravinder Singh's company is going to earn the trust? What am I going to give them? And then success will breed success. Again, go back to focus, demonstrate it with 300, 400, 500,000 people, get referenceable consumers and then scale. But my simple request to you is go back to your team, go back to consumers who are not buying it. Don't get distracted with noise of marketing. I give you the example of Paperboard. I think he won awards for that campaign. But his valuation and forget the valuation, the number of consumers that ID Fresh touches today in a world where there is Unilever, there is Tata, there are huge brands playing in this space, he's done it right. Because he solved for the one thing that others were not paying attention to, and that is sales and distribution. Right? Like Vijay says, my secret sauce is talk to the employer. If you don't talk to the employer, you don't walk the hard way, you're not going to get it. So maybe your problem is deeper. I don't want to make your problem frivolous, but I would urge you to go back and understand why is it that your team is not able to have the right conversation with the consumer? What is your pivot from a communication standpoint?
So I think all the brand presence and ads, investor funded or whatever way, I mean, it makes us as founders, and I've been, I'm still going through that journey, but it feels that is the brand. While slowly and gradually you realize that your relationship with the customer is the brand, not the brand film that is built. So what we started doing was integrating microtransactions of trust inside our delivery. Say every session that you have, we actively get your rating of the session.
Do you talk about the rating? Sorry.
Yeah, every morning meeting we have that rating. That is a
you
key
talk
KPI.
to your consumers that this is the rating that we're getting.
Yeah. So then every load rating that we get, we have a customer success team that makes it a point that they get a call within the 24 hours. Like what has been the source of the So I mean, not that we have cracked it, but I think that microtransactions of trust has been helping us in building that kind of reference groups and brand. Of course, we cannot afford those big bang launches and TV films and ads and all of that. But these are some of the ways we can think of.
Once again, as I heard you, a very different thought has come to my mind. I'm just thinking, of course, purity and the integrity, those words are used, not purity. The trust word is used, is very common, it comes from accounts. But as I heard you, I'm just thinking, Mrs. Sharma is not the real customer.
She is.
No, so I'm just putting it, as I heard you, in Canadian model of instructional design, which was behavioral, mechanistic behavior. See, let's not go to the Gestalt word, let's say 17th century, then Dewey everything. Then comes Skinner. And Skinner got terribly impressed by the electrical control system, target, etc. and everything, mechanistic. CBT came, the businesses came. And Mrs. Sharma became, or the corporate, became the customer. The customer really was the purity. Customer really was the, as we just now put it, respect. If I would have understood that the customer is respect, however small I might have been, the biggest bid would not have been able to compete with, and the people would have come to me. So I think, I'm just thinking, the information processing and respect or purity is information processing. And the Skinnerian model of instructional design is already on the back foot, rightly speaking. And the digital age has made it more enforcing that issue. Today I do not know in the class, even if I tell students, should I attempt the best, I'm taking a very interesting issue. Should I insist that you attempt or not attempt? I mean, you have students like this and they are performing like this. Now what do I say? You did come at my class at 11 o'clock and you still perform. What should I really say? Then I have to take help of the Dean Academic and say, please make it a rule and then 10% I do it. I really know the option. And if the Dean Academic becomes terribly aggressive, then I'm on the back foot completely. I take a leave for 1 month. Okay, over to you.
Third semester in school, we had a very cool professor of law. He was teaching us law, he was a practitioner. And he would only come at 7 in the morning or 7 in the evening because he was very brilliant, law and very successful. And his simple rule on attendance was all of you will get 100% attendance. So don't come to my class if you want attendance. And I'll give you an A grade. But don't disturb me if you're coming here for attendance. And believe you me, people would come to his class at 6:55 AM or PM and nobody would move out and we would urge him to continue to learn. He was rated as one of the highest, most loved professor, and he would bring real problems, not about companies like 1963 or Section 84. He would bring real problems of what he was facing with his clients, and not even case studies, they were not documented. He would, with the client privilege, he would actually discuss actual cases. And way back in 2000, he was talking to us about sexual harassment cases, how do we deal with it, how do we build it, consumer courts. So yeah, I never believed that that attendance is something that is stick and carrot doesn't work. Just give everybody 100% attendance. Let's have effective people in class. Okay, so I hope I've been effective and able to provoke some thoughts and come to I had time to work with some of you. Please know that wherever you are in your stage, you're doing something that you're going to remember, which you're going to tell hopefully your grandchildren if you have any. This journey is important. It's fraught with a lot of difficulty. It is an emotional journey. So all the very best. Use everything that you have at your resources, and please don't give up. And if you do encounter the F word, the failure, please just forget about it and forge ahead. So be vulnerable and don't be afraid. Thank you.